Hi, everyone, and welcome to this conversation and mini training on protecting our faith communities against white nationalism. I'm Rabbi Alissa Wise, Deputy Director at Jewish Voice for Peace, and I'm here with Linda Sarsour. Linda, want to introduce yourself?
I am your favorite Palestinian Muslim American neighbor that you love so much, and Executive Director of MPower Change, which is the first Muslim-led offline organizing platform.
So MPower Change and Jewish Voice for Peace decided to host this webinar because we have a vision that's very bold in this political moment, which is a vision of cross-community solidarity. And this is an opportunity to show that we find safety with each other, not just with the police, and that long-term safety lies in defeating white Christian nationalism and other systems of oppression. And it's particularly important for me, in this political moment when it seems like every week there's something devastating. Just yesterday was news of a mosque arson in New Haven, whether it's Poway or Pittsburgh or Christchurch or Sikh temples or Black churches. Our houses of worship are under attack, and it can make us feel fear. It can make us feel numb. It can make us feel scared, right? And that we are hoping that through having a conversation together of how we protect each other in the face of this violence, we can bring more safety and security and resiliency to our communities. Linda.
Thank you. I'm already feeling safe just having this conversation, and really grateful for our friends at Jewish Voice for Peace. And many people don't know this, but we've been working with Jewish Voice for Peace for the last almost 15 years. And they have always stepped up for our community, especially when it was not politically convenient to do so. So this is not a new relationship. We didn't start becoming friends and allies and partners in light of this kind of rise in white nationalism in the kind of, quote, day and age of Donald Trump. We understood that solidarity was always important to all the work that we were doing, whether we were fighting for, the sanctity of Black life, immigrant rights, whether we were fighting against unwarranted surveillance and the type of discriminatory police practices by police forces across the country, whether we were standing in solidarity together with Palestinian human rights. We've always been together. Jewish Voice for Peace has come and defended our community leaders, always at the right time, never hesitated to come stand up for our people, and to be more specific, really for me. And I'm very grateful to be here. And I do this work. I'm bold in the work that I do because I know I have allies like JVP members all over the country who are always ready to stand up for what is right, even when it's not the most convenient. And one of the reasons why I really want to have this conversation, we're going to do a mini training with the fabulous Audrey in just a few moments, is because the right is really strategic. And oftentimes we kind of push it to the side. Like, do they really know what they're doing? Like, is the opposition really organized? And they are absolutely organized and well organized. And they have actually figured out where the weaknesses are in our communities and in our movements. And they are, in fact, weaponizing us against one another. And what they have realized is that solidarity is our survival. And we will not be able to survive as Jewish communities, as Muslim communities, as any marginalized communities without solidarity. It's just not going to happen. And so because of that, what they're doing is they're trying to pin us up against each other. And we have seen this play out over and over and over again. And unfortunately, a lot of liberals fall for the divisions and fall for these tactics. And it's actually quite dangerous. And it's dangerous for people of color, it's dangerous for marginalized people, and most often dangerous for Jewish people as well. And so for me, I come to this conversation with the understanding that my community will not survive without relationships, without solidarity, without love, without allyship. And that in fact, it actually is very brave to engage in solidarity. And that it's not easy to engage in solidarity, and that I'm committed, and my organization MPower Change is committed, and our membership is committed to protecting the most marginalized amongst us. And we have found ourselves all to be marginalized in this moment. Some of us in different ways, which is another thing that I think we need to really name, that while we are all feeling hurt and marginalized, we are not all marginalized in the same way. So I myself, as a Palestinian American, as a light-skinned Arab American Muslim, do not face the same type of systemic racism that Black Muslims face, for example, or other Black trans people or other marginalized people. So we need to also be able to say that we're not kind of playing oppression Olympics in this moment, because that's exactly what the right wants us to do. They want us to fight over who's more hurt. I don't want anybody to be hurt. And I think this is a moment for us to come together. And the last thing that I'll say is, before I give this back to Alissa to give us some more thoughts, and then we go back and present this to Audrey, is that there's an elephant in the room that I think we need to talk about. And the elephant in the room is that the right has specifically been weaponizing anti-Semitism against the left and against progressives and against our communities. And the point of weaponizing anti-Semitism is really to divide us, and to put us up against one another, to create mistrust, to put Jewish communities in a place where they don't even know who their friends are. So who's going to protect Jewish people? And I will say to you, it's going to be us. And I want to make no mistake about that we will be the first people to stand up for our Jewish sisters and brothers in any time of need. And I say that also to say that the elephant in the room is Israel-Palestine. And one sure that people understand that being unsafe is not the same as being uncomfortable. So when Linda says something about Israel, you're going to vehemently disagree with me, and that's okay. But I'm not making you unsafe in this moment. And that's the kind of distinction we need to make, because the right wants you to think that people like me and Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Sheikh Omar Suleiman, and all these Palestinian Muslim American leaders are making you unsafe, when in fact we are the people who will be on the front lines protecting all of you. So my only advice before Audrey takes you to the very specific, steps of things that we could do for one another is stay focused, stay united, stay together. Don't fall for the tactics of the right. I never do. And that's why I'm still here. And I love and appreciate you all. And I want to thank Audrey and Alissa for also being part of this conversation.
Thanks, Linda. One of the things, as you were talking about solidarity and the essential nature of it in this political moment, it occurs to me this is the only long-term safety plan that we have, right? There's not another option, right? It's we have to build this solidarity, because if we don't, then it's going to be, the safety is only going to be provided to white people, particularly white Christians, in our society. And I, resonate a lot with a lot of what you said, because for white Jews like myself, this is a really activating moment where we see that systems that have benefited us and our whiteness are inherently violent. And while we're occasionally getting explicitly targeted now, the people of color and Muslims and Black people have been getting directly targeted every day all along. And I think about how, the Jewish community I was raised in really did teach me that I was alone in the world, and Jews were alone in the world, because unfortunately, I think that was the reality in Europe where my family was from, right? That there was a systemic failure of solidarity towards Jews. But I think we have an opportunity and a chance to learn from that failure of solidarity, and we are. And in the process of building solidarity, we might also just be able to begin to heal from some of that trauma. So right now, the right has an intensive strategy of seeking to divide and destroy our solidarity, as you were saying, Linda. And we see it, and we see that they're trying to do that, and we reject it and turn to each other for safety. And, in part of this conversation, obviously there's a spectrum of violence that our communities have experienced and can experience. And part of what we're hoping that this can prepare people for and get you thinking about is how we can practice and build practices of safety outside of police, because police make lots of people less safe, not more safe, in our white supremacist society. And the tension that, on the other hand, the police have a plan for active shooters. And that's a tension that we're in right now, of developing ways of protecting ourselves that don't rely on the police. And so a lot of Jewish communities are haven't done this thinking yet are doing it in a new way because of the violence right now. And I know that's true for other faith communities. You know, at JVP, we have had some experience in other different kinds of violence, right? Whether it's disruptions, there was some people have come into, it happened once out in the Bay Area that our chapters were pepper sprayed. People came in and pepper sprayed them at a meeting they were having, graffiti, anti-Semitic graffiti, death threats, and those kinds of things. And it's an opportunity to build from these experiences how to be resilient in the face of these, and be able to be prepared, right? Because it's actually far more likely that somebody's going to walk into your house of worship during prayer and shout something racist and violent. And so how do we prepare for all kinds of situations? So that's part of what we're hoping that we can get into today. So I think now we can pass it back to Audrey to take us through kind of more practically how we can be protecting ourselves.
Yes, we will get to our fabulous Audrey who kindly joined us today. For folks who don't know Audrey Kuo, she's a poet. I mean, they are a poet, writer, bread baker, and organizer committed to building networks among queer and trans people of color working toward collective liberation, grounded in healing and disability justice. They currently reside on Tongva land in Los Angeles. Audrey is the co-founder of Freedom Verses, a strategic consulting and facilitation partnership. They are also on the steering committee of Vigilant Love, a grassroots network working to build collective resistance to Islamophobia and other forms of violence. Thank you, Audrey, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. I'm really excited to be representing Vigilant Love in this work. I think you can see on my shirt, solidarity by any means necessary. It's really core to our founding story. Vigilant Love grew out of relationships between Japanese Americans who had fought for redress and reparations and who experienced incarceration, and recognized after September 11th that the rising tide of Islamophobia would continue to threaten communities. And really, we were born out of those relationships and wanting to ensure that there is organizing to resist Islamophobia and potential incarceration of Muslims. We have seen that violence impacts other communities, and even how immigrant incarceration is happening right now is all repeating parts of history that we wish had not been repeated. And so I really just want to note, as we know, this is a starting point. De-escalation tactics are really important, but I strongly recommend that people practice together. So if you're watching this webinar and you are part of a community that is looking to support other faith communities, or you're looking to show up in solidarity for other communities, please know that practicing in real life is very helpful. And there's only so much that I can do on a recorded webinar if I'm not interacting with you, but I'm hopeful that these are great starting points for conversations. So I'm looking at my notes as well. I also want to name that one of the things that I think Vigilant Love has done really well is practicing solidarity and having allies show up for one another. So after the election, when we're having rallies and vigils against Islamophobia, a lot of people like myself who are not Muslim, I'm not Japanese either, I'm Taiwanese, we're forming safety teams. And so we were providing barriers around a vigil so that people who were most impacted could have space to show up, mourn, grieve, pray together. On the day that the first Muslim ban went into effect, there was a huge action at LAX. And one of the things that I think Vigilant Love is most proud of still was that we were able to gather people who showed up and were just angry to create a barrier of bodies so that there could be afternoon prayer in the actual area where people were being detained. And so we consider healing justice as part of our work, as part of our direct actions, and not something that we do after the fact. And I'll talk more about that as we go into safety. But on the note of healing justice, I wanted to start with a grounding. So I know I can't see any of you, and this is a recorded webinar, but I'm trusting that you'll all do this. But if you feel comfortable, you can either close your eyes, or if you'd like to just cast your gaze down. I recommend, if you're able, to put your feet on the floor. It's helpful to feel your connection with the earth. And then just take a few deep breaths, whatever feels good to you. Try to, with each breath, fill your lungs all the way. Feel your belly expand. And I'm going to teach a quick grounding that I've done in a few action scenarios. So we start with our 5 senses. So the first thing you'll do is think of 5 things that you can see and just list them. It can be a bright color, the shoelaces on your shoe, maybe a friend's great outfit. Just 5 things you can see and notice them. And then take a breath in, and as you breathe out, you can let those 5 things go. And then think about 4 things that you can feel. So that could be the touch of the clothes on your skin. If you're indoors, maybe some circulating air. You're probably indoors because you're watching this online. Maybe your feet on the ground. Just 4 things that feel a physical sensation of touch. And then you can take another deep breath and let those go. And then 3 things you can hear. So right now, maybe the sound of my voice. Maybe there's traffic going by. Maybe if you're indoors, there's a hum of electricity. Just 3 things you can hear. Try to focus on each one by one. You take another breath. Let those go. And then 2 things you taste. So if you're not eating now, it could be the taste of your coffee in the morning. I'm sorry if you're fasting and I'm talking about food. But 2 things that you can remember the taste of and focus on that sensation. And then take a breath and let those go. And 1 thing you can smell. Just any scent or aroma. Try to focus on what it's like, breathing it into your body. And then you can take another breath and let those go. And now, as you're in this hopefully more grounded state, I'd like for you to think about what safety feels like for you. Maybe it's this feeling of groundedness and connection to your body. For some of us, being really embodied can feel unsafe, for trans folks, for marginalized folks, but hopefully you have a feeling of safety. Maybe it's showing up with your allies and feeling their love around you. But that's the feeling that we want to return to for this next quick training, is being able to remember what safety feels like and being able to project that. I'm trained as a street medic, and really our biggest advice that we give and our first task as street medics is to spread calm. So if you're providing safety for an action, if you are showing up in solidarity for others, your role is to spread calm. A caveat, like in the case of an active shooter, some of these strategies are not going to be as effective, but for a lot of situations, just having a visible presence that's organized to resist potential threats is enough to deter people. And so as you continue to spread calm, that will have a huge impact. And I also recommend the 5 senses. We've done that before direct actions, before the impacted folks are going to lead something. We'll all ground together, leave space for prayer or spirituality for people to connect and just make sure that they're centered in themselves, because when we move from that place, we're more powerful and we're more able to react. Even though it may feel like you're slowing down and you need all the adrenaline, actually being centered in your body is the best place to be from, so you can have time to pause and be like, what is happening? What are the threats? How am I going to respond from a grounded place? And again, if you're doing this with your community, I'd love for you to share with each other what safety looks and feels like, because that's what we're really trying to build together. And if you're showing up in an interfaith action, ideally you're building relationships with folks so that you're not just like standing outside a mosque and they're like, who are you? But you're really asking, like, what is it that you would hope to see from us as allies? How can we support you and how can we build together? Maybe share a meal, maybe talk about what safety looks like, so you're really building the plan together. So next I'm talking about security culture. There's a ton of great resources online about digital security and security culture. So I recommend you read those, because I'm only going to do a quick overview, but it's really thinking about how can I protect myself in all aspects of my life. So things like not posting necessarily where you're going to be if you're planning an action, thinking through how you're communicating. In person is always the best, but like if your phones are around, are they surveilling you? Is your other technology one of the ways that you're being surveilled? I think one example that is funny but not funny is white supremacists showed up to an anti-racist action, and people were trying to figure out how they got there, and they just saw the flyer online. And like, I think what Linda was saying is that they actually are more organized than we think. Like, it's really easy to say like, of course, people who are this ignorant and so full of hate are not intelligent, but that's just not true. Like, if you're posting stuff online, you're making it easier for people to find you. And so thinking about even how you're recruiting other allies, like, do you trust everyone? Do you need to do a social media blast? Or is it better to send even an email, which might be surveilled, but is less visible? Thinking also about physical security. So if you're, I think in this context, protecting a building, do you know where all the entrances and exits are? Are you just standing outside? Like, is there attention paid to where other people could exit from, where other people might be able to enter? Being aware of who you're sharing information with and how visible and public your schedules are. I think the caveat is we're not trying to be paranoid here, but it's just an awareness of what could have an impact. And in terms of relationship building, I always like to say moving at the speed of trust. It can be, especially in this time that we're in, there's so much urgency and there's so much fire that it can feel like we have to respond as urgently. And really giving ourselves permission to think like, how can we bring water? How can we bring slowness and stillness with urgency to what we're doing, but not just fuel fires? And then part of security culture is, I had originally planned to discuss a direct action, but thinking about this being a recorded webinar, I'm not going to go into a ton of details, but I am accessible through Vigilant Love, and I'm open to having deeper conversations, but it's also smart not to post all of your plans for what you're doing on the internet. Great. So from there, I'm going to move into boundaries. So this is a tactic in de-escalation because, like knowing what safety feels like, is knowing what our boundaries are can be really helpful as we're taking risks. So I like to think of boundaries as three parts, the same as any other types of needs. The first part is recognizing a boundary or need in your body. For some of us, I'm talking about the three steps because for some of us, different parts are more difficult than others, and it's helpful to know. So the first step is identifying for yourself what a boundary is. The second would be naming it. And then the third is having it received and or respected. So let's say, for example, someone is walking towards me. I'm in a situation where I'm on a safety team and I'm like, I have a boundary. I want this person not to get closer. So that's me recognizing for myself, I don't want this person to get closer to me. The second step would be me saying, hey, I'm going to have you stop right there. That's close enough. And then third, which is often out of my control, is whether that other person respects that or not. I've done a lot of safety trainings where femmes of color and survivors are leading safety teams. And I think that's one of the ways that we get empowered, is recognizing that there's 3 steps in a boundary. And even if I only control 2, I still did my part. I still named my boundary. So as you're projecting safety, you're thinking like, I know what my value is and I know where my body is, and I'm using it in this way because I love my other communities and I'm showing up in support for them. So I'm naming this boundary. And that's a way of you also projecting your power. I think the one example I thought of was, if you've seen The Godfather, sorry if you haven't, this is a spoiler. There's a scene where I think it's like a florist or a butcher owes a favor to the Godfather, and there's danger. They're at a hospital, and Michael has this like very frightened man just stand outside with him, and he's just like, put your hand in your pocket and act like you have a gun and just look tough. And that is important. Just projecting that you know what you're doing sends a message that you're coordinated, you're unified, you've thought through this, you're in solidarity with another community, and it's going to be harder for anyone who wants to start something to get past you. So being aware of your boundaries, confidently stating them, detaching from the outcome of like, maybe someone will cross my boundary anyway, but I'm going to state it powerfully, gives you energy and projects that out. You're creating safety as a community. So I'm trying to signpost well. The next piece I'm going into will be actual de-escalation tactics. I'm going to explain something that, again, I strongly, strongly recommend that you practice with other people. It's called hassle lines. I thought about doing this for folks, which would have just entailed me yelling into the computer for a minute and being like, what comes up in your body? But that seemed really intense, and I didn't want to embody that for this. So usually with hassle lines, you form 2 lines facing each other. You can split a group into 2 and then have one person facilitate. I always start hassle lines with a safe word so that anyone at any time can step back and be like, I'm done with this. The rules that I usually use are no touching. You can physically move closer. You can raise your voice. You can try to intimidate someone, but no touching, because we're not practicing hitting each other. We're practicing what it feels like in our bodies when someone is escalating and we need to de-escalate. So you'll face each other, and then for about 1 minute, have people who are agitators embody a role. So they could be like, I'm a white supremacist and I'm mad that you are standing in front of this temple, this mosque, this synagogue that I want to go into and yell at people at. So the other person's job is just to de-escalate. So you can try whatever tactics feel good to you without touching that person either. And then stop, give people time to think like, what came up for them, what felt effective, and then ask the agitator too, like, was there anything that someone tried to de-escalate you that actually, even though you were trying to keep escalating, you couldn't escalate because something they did disarmed you? And obviously, because you will be in community and probably like each other, you'll want to de-escalate when someone you care about does that. So it's also helpful for people to be partnered with people they don't know as well, as long as you can build enough trust that feels safe. And then switch roles so that the other person also feels what it's like to agitate, and then both sides get to try de-escalation. I will say that I've seen a lot of communities where people have a really hard time playing the agitator. And then one time I've also had to ask someone to stop because they were just escalating at a point where I was like, this isn't helpful for the exercise. You're actually just triggering everyone. So the facilitator should kind of be keeping an eye, making sure no one is touching. And then like, if you just see people that are like getting pushed to a breaking point, you can just tap their person out and have them stop. And I think even if people are like, oh, that was too much and I can't do that, it doesn't mean they can't be on a safety team. It might just mean like their role is not going to be like, I'm going to be the one in someone's face. There's a lot of different ways that we can provide safety for one another. And I really like hassle lines because it gives people an opportunity to think about what does feel good for me and what's actually past my boundaries and doesn't feel good. And if that's true, it's not anything to feel bad about. I think what we've really learned in this political moment is that there's so many ways for people to show up, and people have all kinds of skills and abilities. And sometimes you could be the offsite person who does healing check-ins afterwards. If you are unable to leave the house for some reason, like you could be the person who makes snacks or does a call or does a check-in or is like people's bail support. And hassle lines are a really great way to practice with someone you trust and then be able to be in community together after and discuss. So things that I have seen that are helpful, and I'm going to stand, is using your tone and voice to match. I'm sorry, you can't see my face. And then also just a subtle hand cue of like putting your hands up here, not in someone's face where you're saying stop, but like right here, kind of about your waist or just one hand. It's kind of a subtle message for someone that you want them to slow down or stop and can give you some space. Something I like to do also is like sometimes I'll leave, you can't really see this well, but it'll leave like part of my body forward, but then I'll pull the rest of myself back. So I'm creating a triangle of space. So I feel my energy pull back even though one of my feet is forward. It doesn't really invite that person to step any closer to me, but I can feel like my torso is further away from someone. And that's just a way for me to feel like, oh, I have more control. And if someone was like going to take a swing at me, they have to get further. Hopefully no one is taking swings at you, but just like subtle ways where you can create space without the other person necessarily recognizing what you're doing. Because if you just take a step back, sometimes they'll take a step forward. So if you step into your triangle, if you've done capoeira or boxing, you'll have a little bit more comfort with that. But just continuing to create space for yourself where you feel comfortable without them necessarily noticing that you're stepping back, because that can invite people to step forward. And if you're trying to hold a line formation, you want to like maintain some way of still being part of the barrier without giving up all of that space. With a caveat also that you should have discussed with your team ahead of time. Like if you know what your triggers are, or if you know you are just like unable to continue, being able to tell other people on your team, like, this is actually too much for me. And then if you've built with the community, again, I'm using an example of protecting a place of faith, just being like, I actually need to go inside right now. And then having built that relationship with the people that you're in solidarity with so that you can like just go in, like maybe wash your face in the bathroom, maybe pull someone to come inside with you and just get some support in that way. In voice and tone. So something that can be helpful is matching people's energy. If someone is loud and you escalate with them, you're just going to end up yelling, but you can match their speed and then slowly start bringing your speed down. So if someone's talking really fast, they're agitated, they're like, why are you here? I hate you. You're what's wrong with this country. Just like being like, I hear you. And then slowly using your own tone and voice to slow down. And they will start matching you too. You can match body language and de-escalate some ways. I think it really depends on the person. And that's why I recommend practicing hassle lines at least a few times, because you can see how it feels and different people react in different ways. I love improv, so I think hassle lines are like a really stressful improv. And same with even live events, you're really thinking on your feet and just being however creative makes sense. I have an example of being in a direct action where someone was escalating and I knew I wouldn't be able to de-escalate that person, but if I kept them occupied for another minute or two, the people would be able to, it was a Black brunch and they were finishing reading the name. So all I needed to do was stall that person until it was done so they wouldn't call the police. And so I just started asking questions. That didn't work. I switched tactics and like they were like walking somewhere. I started walking with them. And I was like, I'm subtly using my body. They were irritated and I was subtly using my body to like get in the way and talking to them and distracting them so they couldn't get to the phone because they were actually polite enough that they were like, I'm not going to step in front of you to grab the phone and do this thing. So keeping in mind what your outcome is that you're hoping for helps you also think of like, what are things that are within what I feel comfortable doing. So again, the big takeaway I think is really doing safety and security and de-escalation really requires you to be in touch with yourself and what feels safe for you, what feels within your boundaries and what risks feel outside of your boundaries and like too much risk. Yeah. Those are my overview points. I will go over them again. So repeating grounding, thinking about what safety looks like in your body, making sure you're paying attention to security culture, not taking big risks that are unnecessary by inviting people to know everything about your movements, knowing your boundaries. So that's identifying the boundary, naming your boundary, and then having it be respected. And then really suggesting practicing hassle lines, practicing using your bodies, your voice, your tone, energy, whatever feels good for you to help de-escalate someone, and then get feedback from the person you're de-escalating. How did that feel for you? What came up in your body when I did this? What made you angrier? And then sharing that as a group. And it's going to be different for everyone, but talking about it as a group helps you to hear more information about bodies in general, how they might respond to different tactics. And then really just uplifting that a lot of organizing and movements have been run by disabled folks, and physically standing in solidarity is not possible for everyone. And it does not mean that that's not solidarity. It doesn't mean it's not allyship, but really making space for everyone to participate in a way that feels within their own body, like feels comfortable within their own body, so that we are building collective safety. I really love two framings that I'll share. One is that the opposite of violence is not peace, but safety. So as we build safety, we're actually removing ways in which people cause violence. I think interpersonal violence, structural violence, the police state are all very interconnected. So the more we can build safety with each other, the more we can actually prevent violence. And I think a lot about Charity Hicks' framing of waging love. So what are we doing to wage love? What does our solidarity look like? And then something that was shared with me more recently is thinking about the difference between soldiers and warriors. So a soldier is someone who fights against an enemy that they hate and are trying to destroy them, which is what we have a lot of in this moment. And a warrior would be someone who fights to protect what they love. So I think really as we show up in solidarity for each other, we are choosing to be warriors and we're choosing to wage love. And I hope that you have lots of safety and feel good in your bodies as you do this work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey.
So I really appreciated in particular the reminder to ground ourselves, because I think we can get, Linda, you say like it's so important to stay focused, right? So how we are able to ground ourselves and stay connected to those we are in solidarity with and in community with and in relationship with seems like such an important lesson for us. So as we close out, I'll say a few words and then pass it to you, Linda, to say goodbye. So just want to say, this work is both urgent and unfortunately not going anywhere anytime soon. So having that pacing of how to build the safety that we need, build our skills, build our resilience, build our strategies, both urgently and within a longer time frame. So for us at JVP, we're noticing we're not doing this alone, right? We're doing this webinar with MPower, with Vigilant Love, right? With other Jewish groups on the Jewish left that JVP is building relationships with. So we have a short-term plan to build out a robust community safety team within JVP. So I'm offering this just also both if you want to get involved in what we're doing, but also so you can think about, is this a framework that you could use in your organization? So for us, our little community safety team is about centering those most impacted. So in this context, we're thinking about people who are targeted by rising white Christian nationalism, either because they're regular worship attendees or are publicly visibly Jewish in some other way, and or folks who are targeted by daily white supremacy because they're people of color, queer, etc. So these are the people that we're bringing together to determine what our medium and long-term plans and organizing should be. So we don't know exactly what they're going to be yet, but we have some principles in mind, which is we want to increase our security know-how along the lines of what Audrey just offered us, and to get safer and divest from the police. We want to build a collection of practical resources that we can share, trainings like this one, and available to both regular worship attendees and secular or white Christian allies. We want to build relationships with and share resources with members of targeted institutions. So be that mosques or Black churches or gurdwaras, we want to be able to share the resources that we're developing and do these together and build our best practices together, and ultimately build towards a future where there's cross-faith, cross-racial, cross-class solidarity and mutual defense against white Christian nationalism and white supremacy. So we're at the beginning of this process and learning as we go. And so hopefully we can continue this conversation with MPower, with Vigilant Love, and with you, whoever you are out there, and engage you in these processes with us. Linda, do you want to wrap us up?
I just wanted to also share my gratitude for Audrey and all the wonderful work that you do on behalf of us all. And it was really touching to me to know that your work has most recently been focused on kind of the rise of Islamophobia and kind of making those direct connections to history, because if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And unfortunately, many don't know our history. So we are actually repeating it as we speak today. And I just wanted to, add one more thing. A lot of times when we talk about solidarity and safety, we hear these policies, sanctuary policies, sanctuary cities, and I tell people sanctuary cities is not a policy, it's a mindset. And I never believe that the government, in fact, or my local city is ever going to protect me in the ways that my neighbors will protect me, in the ways that I will be protected in school or in my place of work or in the local supermarket or even on the streets of my community. So I tell people all the time that we need to walk as ourselves and embody sanctuary as people. And I think that is what's going to keep us all safe. And I am personally committed to that. And what Audrey described does require some courage. And so I want to name that. And I believe wholeheartedly that every one of us has courage. We all have it. We don't always think we can manifest it visibly and publicly, but it lives within each of us. And I know that for a fact. There's been many moments where I felt afraid and scared, and then decided to do something that was out of my comfort zone. And I know that in that moment it was courage that was able to kind of come out for someone else in that moment. And so continue to follow the work that we're doing. I think JVP and MPower Change and many of our allies, we're at the front lines of this work. You know, this is what we do every day. We wake up every morning to defend our communities. And so whether you're following Jewish Voice for Peace, their social media, their website, look at their events that they have across the country, their chapters. You can join us at MPower Change, which is the letter mpowerchange.org. Become a member. It's free. We kind of keep you up to date on all the issues that are impacting Muslim Americans, and really any issue impacting Muslims and Muslim Americans impacts all of us. And we specifically focus on issues impacting marginalized communities. And coming up, where we do these things called iftar in the streets, where we break fast, literally in the street, like outside and outdoors, all over the country. We have a couple of them coming up that you can join. You can go to empowerchange.org and figure out where, or iftar in the streets. .org and find out if there's one happening in your area, or organize your own. So if you go to empowerchange.org/iftar, find one, and if not, organize one. We'll help you out. We have toolkits for that. So just the idea is just to stay in relationship with one another, break bread with one another, be with one another. And our Black family has taught us in a lot of these movement spaces, they when they do the Asada Shakur chant, they say, at the end, it says, we must love and protect one another. And I always say to people, we can't love and protect one another if we don't know one another. So keep building those relationships, keep having those conversations, and we'll see you on the front lines.
Thank you.